Here's my Soloq tier list for patch 10.04, which is the Waylay release patch. In this tier list, I'm going to try and evaluate all the agents and how good they are across all the ranks. So I'm going to find some averages. I'm also going to talk about how good they are in specific ranks for some of the agents. And I'm also going to evaluate how good they are to improve with. Okay, so for the controllers, we'll start with Astra. And I think Astra's a very easy B tier for me. The reason why she's an easy B tier for me is because as the ranks go up, she tends to get better. As the ranks go down, she tends to get worse. And she tends to be in these regions in the lower ranks, tends to be in these regions in the higher ranks. So for me, I think she's a pretty easy B tier. I think if you're in the higher ranks, you're going to want to play her more, especially in map like Pearl. And if you're in the lower ranks, you can maybe play her on Pearl, but I would tend to avoid her below Immortal anyway. So, and in that case, I would play Omen or maybe Brimstone. Next, we've got Brimstone. And once again, another B tier. And this is mainly because he's very much an all-rounder. And I think that he's pretty good to play if you don't really know what you're doing with the game. But I think then you want to move on to some other controllers. I think honestly, Astra, once you get to Immortal, is a good controller to move on to. But I think below that, you can also look at Omen. Next is Clove, and I think Clove is C tier, maybe D tier. I don't think they're very good. Unfortunately, they just kind of neutered the smokes. The smokes just, the cooldown is egregious. And basically the only thing that makes Clove any good is the fact that you can smoke while you're dead. And I think other than that, there's not much going for them. They have quite a few abilities. They have two abilities, the ult and the pick me up, that are very Reyna-esque to me, where it's very much situational and that situation is getting a kill. And those things tend to be worse than other things, basically, because you being reliant on kills means you're going to be feast or famine. And also being reliant on you dying, which is also something that's like Sage, is also not great. It's slightly better than Sage in some ways, but worse in others. Because when you res, you're resing yourself so that you don't have access to another ult, basically, where Sage could res someone with an ult up. And also with the Sage res, it's stuck in place, so that's kind of the worst part about it. Where Clove can kind of res and then go to a safer place to actually get the res off. Obviously, then you have to get a kill to actually be fully alive. So it's not great. So I don't particularly like Clove that much, especially in the current state. Okay, so next is Harbor, and I think Harbor's actually the worst agent in the game. I think that he really struggles to have any impact on any game. I think in pro play, he can be a bit better because teammates can get impact with the Cascade a lot more. You tend to be able to combine with Viper a lot easier because in pro plays, I mean, you can technically communicate it in solo queue, but at the same time, you're probably not getting the value from the double wall anyway, from being able to reset the wall and play with the Viper correctly. No, you can probably communicate it, but you probably will not get the actual value that it's there to provide. So I think that he's probably the worst agent in the game currently. That goes for solo queue and pro play, in my opinion. But I think in pro play, there are also some not great agents as well. I think Clove is one of the agents that are very good. I think Rain is one of the agents that are very good in pro. So yeah, I think Harbor might even be slightly better than them in pro, but not very much. And I think in solo queue, Harbor's flat out the worst agent. Next is Viper. I got Viper in A tier because I think Viper is one of those agents that can lock down a site very easily. And I think in solo queue that's quite valuable. I also think as well you can be quite lurky on Viper. I think that's also quite valuable in solo queue to maybe be able to make your own plays. And I think Viper is one of those agents that can do that. And I think in the controller category, she's the second best at doing it. The best at doing it is Omen. And I think Omen is probably the best agent to play to improve, or at least one of the best agents to improve on. You have controllers, you have smokes as a controller, and then you also have the TPs, which allow you to kind of make your own little plays. So his ult isn't really the greatest. So in terms of power, like he probably isn't actually like fully S tier, because his ult isn't great. But I think in terms of like solo queue improvement and in terms of honestly the rest of his kit and his ult, you're not going to have it every round anyway. Like his basic kit is really good. So, his ult being kind of meh doesn't actually mean as much as you might think, at least in solo queue. And I think that as a result, he's S tier. Okay, so starting off the initiators, we've got Breach. And I think Breach is one of the agents that's kind of riding the meta's coattails a bit, with the Teo being very, very popular. And then I think Breach is really good at supplementing the Teo. So I think that Breach kind of indirectly, if Teo is picked, then he moves up in tiers because Teo's on his team. And he can combine very well with Teo. But I think as an individual agent, he still has the same problems. Things like stun not being super great. It's fine. It's better than Hinder, that's for sure. But it's not great. His actual lines, like he's like area control, area denial, and that kind of stuff, is still good, and his ult is still good. But the problem is that he's tied to walls. He's very hard for him to be self-sufficient. He can be, but he's not great at it. And I think that there are other initiators that are just better than him at doing it. But I do think that Teo is definitely helping him a lot in this meta. And I think that if you do have a Teo on your team, you can prioritize picking the Breach. Because I think that is actually a valuable combo, especially if you are in the higher levels of play and there's more communication going on. I think that it makes more sense to pick Breach Teo and to follow the meta a bit at the moment, considering how strong that combo is. Next is Skye. And I think Skye is also kind of like, I think she's very, very close to C tier, but I think she's B tier. She's fine. She hasn't really been the same since the nerfs to her bird cooldown, because she doesn't really have like the omnipresence or like the constant presence throughout the round anymore. She has to be very selective with what she actually does and how she actually plays, because if you use both birds for info, you don't have any for kills. If you use both for kills, you don't have any info in the round. So it can be quite hard to fit her into comp, especially if she's the only initiator, which tends to be the case in solo queue. So she can kind of struggle a bit, but I think for the most part, she's pretty self-sufficient. She can kind of help you understand how to flash, how to take fights, how to get info early, where to get info early. She's pretty good in that sense. So I think that I've got her in B tier. Okay, so next is Sova, and I've got Sova in the B tier because I think that he is a winner and a loser in this meta, because I think that Breach and Teo are kind of pushing him out of some of his normal roles, whereas I think that agents like Yoru, Cypher, Deadlock are kind of keeping him in his role sometimes as well, where you kind of want that shock for Cypher, you kind of want that shock for Deadlock, and then you also can kind of combine very well with Yoru, who's a very, very strong meta agent currently, as long as you know how to play him. And I think that as well, one of the further reasons why I put him in B tier is because I think he's very similar to Astra, where I think that he can be really good in the higher ranks of play, but I think in the lower ranks of play, he kind of struggles because of the lack of set play and the lack of communication. I think as well that being selfless kind of feels worse in lower ranks, whereas being selfish feels better in lower ranks because you're kind of doing more, you're having more agency, you're learning more. And I think that Sova is one of those agents I wouldn't necessarily recommend because he does lack a decent amount of agency by himself. He's not completely void. He can do things by himself, but I think there's just better options. One of the better options is Fade. I think she's only marginally better. I think she can do basically the main thing that makes her different to Sova, in my opinion, is that Drone is a selfish sort of information tool, whereas, sorry, a selfless information tool, whereas Prowlers are selfish information tools, as well as having the Haunt, which can be both, right? It can be selfless and selfish. So I think that you have a bit more avenues to be strong with Fade. I think the rest of what I've said about Sova kind of applies to Fade. She gets pushed out by the meta a bit. She isn't quite as good at combining with Yoru, but she can still combine with Yoru because of the def and stuff. So yeah, I think that both these agents are completely fine, but I wouldn't really recommend picking them unless you're like towards the Immortal area of rank play. Next is Teo, and Teo's in the A tier because he is just unbelievably strong. I don't think he's necessarily that great for individual improvement, but I think that he's quite good in terms of winning and being strong. I think that's like the main part of this reasoning that he's in A here. I think it'd be kind of egregious for me to put him any lower, because I think that right now he is meta defining, and I think he is very, very strong. It's not like you're going to not learn anything when you're playing him though, but he is very much easy mode. I would honestly say that he is like one of the easiest agents to pick up and play overall as well, in terms of understanding what his abilities do, without having to actually kind of understand them over the course of games. There are also obviously still some things I see that aren't very good, but for the most part, he is definitely A tier, and I think right now you should be having him in a lot of your games, or you're picking him in a lot of your games, if you actually want to climb. But if you want to improve in the long term, I wouldn't necessarily pick him that much. I think that he's pretty good for winning, but not very good for improving. Next is KO, and I think KO is in the C tier for me. I think that overall, he's fallen off since where he used to be really good, but now I think that he's reserved realistically for pro play a bit more, because I think in solo queue, the silence is too hard to get value from, and I think that his flashes are nowhere near as good as used to be, especially his underarm flashes, which used to be really good, and now they're a bit worse. I wouldn't necessarily say that you can't pick him or that he's not very good, but I think that he is not as good as he used to be, and I think that he's decent in terms of improvement. Like, you can learn some things. I think the main thing about him is learning flashes, and where to flash, how to flash. I think that's what the main thing you'll learn when playing KO. But you don't need to play him that much to kind of learn that stuff. So for me, I think he's in C tier. I think overall he's not really that strong of an agent. Okay, so rounding off the initiators, we have Gecko, and I think Gecko's actually pretty good overall. I think that he's one of those agents that you should be kind of looking to play. I think he's really good for improvement. I think he's really good for the actual playing the game and having impact. I think he's really, really strong there because he can constantly pick up his util. He's really good throughout the course of a round. So I would really recommend playing Gecko. He also has some pretty good maps right now as well in the meta. I think he's got Pearl and Icebox, which are both really good maps for him. So I would just recommend playing him. I think he's pretty good. Okay, so now for the Sentinels, we've got Sage. And I think Sage is one of those agents that they are too reliant on situations to go right for them. So, for instance, for a situation that you can get a good heal, a situation where you can get a good res, and realistically, those things don't happen very often, or don't happen often enough where the stars align for you to actually get the heal off or to get the res off. So I do think that she struggles. You're putting yourself in a very difficult position when you pick Sage, because you're asking for things to go right in ways that you can't control. And I think that the wall is pretty good, the slow's pretty good, so it kind of makes up for it in some ways, but nowhere near enough to actually warrant playing her, in my opinion. So I would just stay away from Sage for now. I think that she's kind of needs a rework a tiny bit. I think she's basically been a balancing nightmare since she released anyway, with the wall and the res and the heal both having really hard places to kind of fine tune and find. And I think that they still haven't really found the sweet spot for Sage, and I'm not sure if there even is one. So I do think that they need to look into maybe a rework for her. Okay, the next is Chamber, and I think Chamber is probably one of the best agents in the game currently. And the reason why I say that is because I think Rendezvous is a really good ability. You can take multiple fights straight around and not die, not get traded. I think that's a really powerful ability, especially in solo queue. I think that the fact that his util only costs 200 in total, if that's kind of like in most rounds, because you don't really have to buy bullets. So he has one of the cheapest utils, so he tends to have more money overall than other agents do. His bullets, like his Pocket Guardian, his Headhunter, is very, very strong in rounds where it's relevant. So in like eco rounds where you can bridge the gap and win those rounds with the Headhunter, which is really, really good. His ult is fairly similar to that as well, where you can kind of use it to bridge rounds, or you can just use it to have a backup to your Vandal, or to use it, well, I guess vice versa, really. You can have a Vandal to back up the ult when you're like holding angles and things. And not only that as well, he's very strong with the Operator normally as well. So, and that tends to be a really good positive for solo queue, because in solo queue, people tend to disrespect the Operator a lot. And being an Operator agent that can use it quite well, he tends to be quite the scourge in solo queue. Okay, so next is Vice, and Vice is in the A tier for me. And the reason for that is because I think she's one of the strongest agents in defense currently. I think that it's really hard to attack into her in a rank setting, because I think that people tend to be very uncoordinated and doing their own thing. And Vice is very good at punishing uncoordinated executes onto a site. I think the main problem with Vice, though, is that people can struggle to find impact on attack, and I think it really relies on you being smart with like how to lurk and when to lurk and where to lurk. And I think that Vice, I think it really, really relies on you being good as a player to play Vice on attack. So that's the reason why like maybe she's not quite S tier, but I think overall she's a very strong agent, and I recommend that you play her and learn her. Next is Cypher, and I think Cypher is good as always, basically. I mean, as always, he used to be really, really bad, but now I think he is really, really good. I think that, I mean, he's been good for quite a while now. But I think, yeah, his strips are good. You're going to be basically killing people a lot in solo queue with good setups, with revealing them and killing them through your cages. Overall, you have a lot more options as well, like in lurks as well, than other Sentinels might do because of your smokes. So because your cages, right, you can cage off specific areas. You can have a lot of impact with it actually having the impact there, right? You can place a cage, activate it a tiny bit later to make it seem like you're there when you're not. Other Sentinels don't really have this, so he tends to be really good at like the lurking type deal, right? That tends to be really, really good for his identity. I guess this is Deadlock, and I think Deadlock is pretty good overall. She tends to have a lot more value to bring than Vice does on attack, as well as locking in the site fairly similarly. The one, obviously, the main problem that Deadlock has is the anti-flank stuff, and that stuff is hard to kind of get around, so that's like her main weakness. But other than that, she's a very strong agent. The sound sentences are really, really good in post-plant situations, really good in defense situations. The wall's really good in a lot of different situations, and the net is also good in a lot of different situations. The ult is really good in low number situations. It's also good in just trying to get like free kills. It's good versus lurk versus lurk and that kind of stuff to guarantee the kill on the lurk and that kind of thing. It can be really, really good in those sort of situations, and I think that Deadlock is worth playing and worth learning. Next is Killjoy, and I think Killjoy, unfortunately, is kind of like the biggest loser in the meta to the Sentinels. Tayo exists. It's really hard for her to get good ults off with Tayo existing, especially Tayo Breach as well, because they can just save all their util for the Killjoy ult. So I think overall, Killjoy is in a very big suffering state right now. I don't think she's that bad, especially in solo queue, because you don't tend to have Tayo Breach in solo queue that much, so she tends to be fine. But I think overall that she can struggle if the meta doesn't align for her. And I think that overall, like, she's fine. Like, the rest of her abilities are fine. They're nothing special compared to these, so she's fine. She's fine. Okay, so first we've got Jet, and I think Jet doesn't require that much explanation, to be honest. She's always been towards the top, really, for mainly the reason that she has a dash and a smoke, and the updraft definitely helps, where she can get into situations that can provide a lot of value for your team, so she can create a lot of space for your team, as well as taking her own fights if she wants to, by dashing away after taking a fight and that kind of stuff. She's very good with the operator. Overall, she's just a very strong agent. She has a bridge ult like Chamber does, where she can bridge around. She can use knives to kind of be a backup to the operator. All that type of stuff just works in her favor. We'll go over Waylay very soon, who I think is a very similar agent, and I'll talk about the reasons why Waylay isn't in S tier very, very soon. Next is ISO. ISO for me is A tier. I think he's kind of like the macro duelist, as I've kind of mentioned before in a video when he came out, where I think that he's very good at manipulating the map, very good at helping your teammates get control of areas by ulting them away, very good at taking lines with his fragile thing. I think it did actually get worse for solo queue by giving him one that silences, mainly because silence tends to be worse in solo queue, and like generally it's better to have an abundance of abilities in solo queue to help you get a lot more value as an individual threat around. So I think that technically it was a nerf to his solo queue prowess that he only has one fragile now. But I think overall, he's still in a good state. And I think that the shield is really good for taking fights. So I think he's really good in solo queue. Okay, so next is Neon. I think Neon's actually overall a pretty good agent. I think we've seen her in pro play a couple times recently. And I think she is good. But the problem is with that is that I think that she really needs to be supported quite well for her to actually get the value that she really can get. And I think that as a result, she's not really that good in solo queue. Next is Phoenix. And I think Phoenix is in the A tier. So I think that the reason why he's in the A tier is because I think his flash is really good in solo queue. He has his own wall, so he can make his own plays a lot easier in solo queue. His ult is really strong. His molly heals him. I wouldn't necessarily use it as a molly as a heal. I would use it more as like an actual molly anyway. But for the most part, he has a lot more self-sufficiency going on than an agent like Neon. And I think that overall, he is really good at taking fights throughout around. His flashes are really good at that. His ult helps him do that. His wall helps him do that. His wall can help him lurk. His wall can help him do a lot of different things, get onto site, that kind of stuff, scale. So I think he is overall a very strong agent. The next is Raze, and Raze is S tier for me because of the mobility and the lethality of her kit. The mobility is really good. She can take a lot of space for her team, as well as the lethality of her kit. She can take space, she can keep space. She's very, very strong in that way. The boombot helps with the info as well before you actually go in. Or to help her mid-round, to help her do a lot of different things. I think overall, Raze has always been very good, and I think she continues to be good. And also as well, help you learn the skills that you need for like lineups and learning when to go in, how to take fights, when to take fights, how to get info in mid-rounds, how to play mid-rounds, how to post-plant as well correctly with her nade, with her rocket. She's got a lot of skills built into her as well, so she's worth learning, basically. Next is Reyna, a character that isn't worth learning, in my opinion. I think overall, this is like the Smurf agent, where I think that if you're better than the opponent, you tend to be wanting to play Reyna. Overall, she's very feast or famine. If you're not feasting, you are basically completely useless. So for me, I think Reyna isn't really an agent that should be played very much. Of course, it's like probably the most popular agent overall. But for me, I don't think you should play it if you actually value climbing or value improving at the game. Next is Waylay. And Waylay, for me, also in the C tier. I think that Waylay is unfortunately suffering from the saturate and the hinder safe effect, both being very, very useless. I think that the refract is actually a really good ability, along with the dash I think is a good ability. So honestly, if we just look at those two abilities alone, and we just say that she had a decent kit otherwise, she would be like up here somewhere. Maybe even S tier. If you notice, right? Chamber Rendezvous, Jet Dash, they're both in S tier. She basically has Refract, which is a dash back, like very similar to Rendezvous. It's like Time Rendezvous. And also the dash, very similar to, I would say it's more similar to Satchel's maybe. But for the most part, she's very similar to these agents. So why isn't she there, right? It's mainly because the hinder status effect and the saturate. It's actually not worth buying saturate majority of the time. The ability is almost useless. It's really insane how bad the surrounding kit is, to a point where I actually don't recommend you play the agent, even though 2 of the abilities are really good. I think that the dash is good. I think that the refract is good. They're not quite as good in terms of like the way that they play. Like I would prefer Rendezvous to refract, and I would prefer Jet Dash or Ray Satchels to the jump that Waylay has, who I think is called Light Speed. I would prefer to have those other agents' abilities, but they're a really good set of abilities to have on the same agent, because it gives you a lot of depth in how much mobility you can have and how many fights you can take, where you can take those fights. It gives you so much utility in that way, I guess, or I guess it's kind of utility in that way. The problem is hinder is a terrible status effect, and saturate, if it was a smoke, she would be S tier probably, or towards A or B tier. But she's not. She doesn't have a smoke. She has saturate, and it literally is not worth buying. Her ult is fine. It's not great. It's very much an initiator one, in my opinion. It's much more like an initiator ult than it is about a duel. Than it is like a duelist ult to me. So I think she might need a bit of a rework towards her hinder status effect being a bit more strong, or she just needs something that can replace the hinder with something that maybe still fits her theme but is actually quite good. But we'll just have to see. Maybe she needs like a light screen, you know, because she's all about light. Maybe a light screen could be a good idea, like a smoke that maybe has a flash tied to it or something. I don't know. She needs something like that, I think, to actually be quite useful. Okay, so finally we've got Yoru, who's in the S tier for me. So basically his kit is quite overloaded, I would say. That he's got a lot going on in his kit, and it's worth learning. There's a lot of really strong abilities in there. His flash is good. His TP is really strong. His ult is really strong. His fake out is fine, and it can be good for a lot of different reasons. One of the main reasons is that it alleviates a lot of Sentinel util, and you can use that so well. And honestly, it's probably better than a lot of other agents in that way, and it's really unique to him that he can use his clone to like trigger a voice wall, trigger a cipher trap, that kind of stuff, right? Trigger a deadlock sensor. Those are really, really important things to trigger for your team with your fake out. The other things that make him strong as well, that I've already mentioned with the TP and stuff, one of the main things about TP is that on defense, you can use it to basically bolster the other side of the map that you're not playing in, and then TP there when it's needed, right? Yeah, so I think actually, I'm going to do this. I think Yoru actually might be the strongest agent in the game currently. So I would recommend playing him. I think he's not only is he the strongest, but I think he gives you a lot of learning opportunities. So overall, he's probably my most recommended agent to play and pick up and learn. However, one of the main things about him is that he's going to be quite hard to learn. So only do it if you really have the time to do it. If you put in a lot of games, then it might be worth to actually play him. If you're not the type of person that puts in a lot of games, you have a limited amount of time, I would probably put it into other agents that don't take as much learning time, like Chamber, like Jet, like Raze. Maybe Jet, like Chamber, Jet, not so much Raze. Raze takes a decent amount of learning time as well, to be fair. Yeah, so that's it for the tier list. I'd love to know what you guys think about my tier list in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in my next one.